Thank you for joining me in that. I'm now honored to introduce Philip Swift, 2017 Sea to Sky Summit keynote speaker. Phil has spent his mainstream career as a successful entrepreneur and investor, as one of the founders and past president and CEO of ARC Financial Group, which manages over $5 billion. He is here today, however, to share with us a parallel story, and that's one of his philanthropic leadership. It's a story of expanded perspectives that's led him to building hospitals and schools, social programs in places like India and Tibet. It's also a story that connects big business with spirituality and wellness. Please help me welcome to the stage Phil Swift.
Well, thank you and good afternoon. And thank you very much for those kind words and the opportunity to speak here to you today. This is, what a great environment to be able to do this up in Whistler here, to think innovative thoughts and big ideas. And I feel very much, a lot of what was said this morning resonates deeply for me, so I feel like I'm in harmony with some of what we've talked about already. I'd like to add my story to it. I apologize for being behind the podium here. I may step out a little bit after, but to paraphrase Abraham Lincoln, he said, I wrote you a long letter because I didn't have time to write you a short one. And so I pulled a lot of this material together here, and I want to be sure I'm on track and cover the key points. So I've given many speeches before to groups, but it's been more in a professional and expertise-oriented context, and so this is a bit unique. This is more a personal story about my journey and how it connects to these themes. And let me just get going here with there we go, to these themes among others. And so integrative medicine is a project I want to talk about. It was really how I met Michelle a couple of months ago. We were talking to I was summarizing what we were doing in this area to an impact investment group in Vancouver, and I gave a little bit of a background story to it, and Michelle, I think, was more interested in the background story than my project, and invited me to share that with you today. I want to talk about entrepreneurship. I'm not going to spend much time talking about the success in business and that story, but I would like to share, because I know there's many entrepreneurs here today, I'd like to share some of the lessons that I think are important on entrepreneurship. And I think it is a form of integration, because you're taking concepts and ideas and trying to integrate them, connect them in a new way to create something new in the world. And finally, here's a big question here that I thought I would add. It's a little bit ambitious, but I thought I would introduce it in the talk, and that is, how do we connect all the disparate parts of ourselves and the journey and the experiences that we have in our journey into a meaningful narrative in our life? And I want to try to address that and share with you my insights into that. And I'll get you thinking about it by posing a question that I like, and that is, what are the two most important days of your life? And many people get the first day. Everybody tends to agree on the first day, the day I was born. But the second one, there's a fair bit of debate. People think the day I got married, or the day I had my kids, or something like that. The one that resonates for me is the day you discover why you were born. And so I want to try and address that. So I'd like to just start my journey with a brief summary of success, adversity, and transformation. And I want to describe kind of the paradigm that I started with in my business career. I studied math, philosophy, and business at university. And then I worked with major resource companies in Canada, and then I discovered that I was very entrepreneurial, and I got into the investment business, which lined up more with the kind of personality and background that I had, and worked as a securities analyst and in corporate finance. And with two partners, we started ARC Financial Corporation that Robin mentioned 29 years ago. And I can say that we never imagined it would be as successful as it was. And it was it was good people, hard work, and some luck. We built it into this, the largest private equity energy investment firm in Canada, and spun off a resource company that's now much larger even than the ARC Financial Corporation. And so it was enormously successful, and I'm very grateful for that. Through the process, as we achieved that success, there was an opportunity to give back, as many did, and I did that also in the community, and in conventional ways. But it changed, and I stepped up in a significant way, and I'll explain about the what I did and why I did that. But then in this wonderful fairy tale story, as often happens in life, there was a crisis. In my late 30s, I had a health challenge, and so the story got more interesting and more challenging for many, many years. And these challenges, adversity is one of the great teachers, and you can rise or fall on these adversities and you on these experiences, or you could also transform. They can be transformational. For me, it was. And I want to share that experience of transformation with you, because it fundamentally changed how I look at the world and how I operate in the world. And it was a rare autoimmune illness, but it was a bit vague to begin with. And I thought, I chalked it up to having a stressful job, a lot of travel, long hours, a bit of an indulgent lifestyle. But I was having these vague symptoms, and I thought, you know, if I took some more holidays and I dealt with my stress better, maybe they would correct. And I had experiences. I'd be walking through an airport with my young children in my arms, and my arms would get incredibly weak, and I'd have to put them down before we could carry on. I was quite athletic, and I used to jog all the time. And when we went on holidays and I thought I could get ahead, I jogged for a few days in a row. Instead of getting stronger, I was getting weaker, and they felt very heavy, rubbery even. My voice, I would lose my voice from time to time, which was difficult given the job that I had. I can remember at a corporate event, at dinner, speaking to our group, and after a glass or two of wine, I lost my voice, which was a bit distressing. And then I can remember shortly after being the keynote speaker in New York to about 2,500 people and wondering if my voice was going to hold up, which was a little bit stressful. So it was diagnosed as myasthenia gravis, a rare autoimmune illness that affects muscle. I think, as we heard earlier today, there's a lot of chronic illness. Autoimmune affects about 7% of the world's population. And there are about 80 types of autoimmune illnesses. And Western conventional medical science hasn't discovered the cause or the cure for any of them, but there is medication to cope with it. So as an entrepreneur, I thought, this is one more challenge. Let's see what we can do with this. Unfortunately, I had the resources to pursue it in a number of ways. Conventionally, I sought out some of the experts in the world in this condition, and one of them was Dr. Drachman at Johns Hopkins, and we spent time with him, and he had his medication recommendations, but we also funded a GWAS study, a genetic-wide association study, to see if we could find some genetic insights into this, which we did, although there was no magic bullet with it. And on the unconventional side, alternative side, we looked at I got a team together and we studied what was being done all over the world in other traditions, like traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and so on. And then internally, it was also, those were external. Internally, what might be causing this? I did some personal growth work. Was it emotional? Mind-body work, meditation, consciousness? Were there insights there? And I met someone that I worked with, became a good friend. He was a doctor. He was an expert in alternative medicine. He was also a psychiatrist, and he was East Indian. And he would pose interesting questions like, autoimmune, what does that mean symbolically? You're fighting self, physically, but what else might you be fighting? What do you think about intuition? And I said, I don't think anything about intuition. He said, well, you should, because you're very good at it, which I discovered in the journey. And I was very familiar with Western philosophy, but he was from the East, and he sent me all these books, Autobiography of a Yogi and others, and they really intrigued me, and there was other perspectives there, and it led to a trip to India, India and Tibet. The first trip was to India, and to meet with various people over there to see if there was some new insights or they could be of help, and Tibet came later. And I'll just mention, it happened around the time of the millennium, and everybody was thinking of what they were going to do for the millennium and what interesting things might they pursue. And we had ideas, frivolous ideas, like going to the Mediterranean, renting a yacht and drinking champagne. Unfortunately, we didn't run with that. We found something much more meaningful to do, and I'll show you a picture here in a moment, but it was to build a hospital in southern India, and a 200-bed hospital, and it's intriguing in terms of what you can do in some of these parts of the world. I don't know if you know the rules of thumb and costs for hospitals, but here they're about $1 million a bed. At the time, it was $10,000 a bed, so 2 orders of magnitude less. So with the same dollars, they go much further. And it was one of the most meaningful things we've done. He also introduced me to some, I'll call them masters or great teachers. the wise ones. I might call them enlightened masters in the East, and I'll share some experiences with that. And I love Shakespeare's quote, because this was starting to expand my consciousness a little bit. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. And it started to expand the way I was viewing the world. So I'm going to run through some, I've got a lot of slides here. I don't want to make it a travelogue, so I'm going to go through this quite quickly here. This is, you can see Chennai in the south. It was in Tamil Nadu in southern India. That's a picture of my daughter. She was quite young at the time, running through the grounds here near a temple that was being constructed at the time. It's the same latitude as Hawaii. It's a beautiful part of India. Oh boy, heavy thumb. This is a model. The hospital's built now, but I've got some old photos. This was a model of the hospital, about a 200-bed hospital. That's it under construction. I was blessed with being there when one of the first babies was born in the hospital. This is a school. We were involved in building a school there, and these are the children that the school now has expanded to be from kindergarten through grade 12. This is my son Gabriel and I. Everyone that comes to this area, this Pedum it's called, is fed, and we were doing seva there, helping to serve food. This is my wife and daughter here in one of the social programs, handing out funds to these widows. Here we were at the orphanage that we visited. You can see it's a cinder block. It's just off a highway, but the kids are quite beautiful. I won't take you through. I've done this before where I visit the orphanage through the eyes of my 10-year-old daughter, but we'll all be crying, so I'm going to have to, we'll skip that one. And here they put us to work. This was more recent. We were doing some morning work before breakfast, washing Vaishnavi, the elephant that's at this area. So what did we learn? What did I learn there? And first I'm going to quote a mantra, Om Namo Narayani, and many of you may know mantras, and they're Sanskrit, and they have great power. And sound is very important to us. I mean, we all know the importance of music and how that can move us one way or the other. We know the power of the words, I love you, I hate you, have such different meanings and how they can move you. And mantras have that same power, greater power actually, and it's the sound that our soul wants to hear. And so I've probably done this mantra millions of times over the last 20 years. It gives me great insight into things and guidance in my life. And it was given to me by a great spiritual teacher, Sri Narayanayama, that we met there, who in India they consider an avatar. And I'm just going to share, there was so much I learned, but I'm just going to share a few things here. And one is, do you know the difference between happiness and joy? And happiness is, I would describe it as those things, it'll make us happy if we buy a new car, we're thrilled with that for a little while and the novelty wears off. It might be that we get some recognition, or promotion or something, and it makes us feel good, but it's really connected to our ego and it's externally bound. Inevitably it passes. Whereas joy is deeper, it's fuller, it's more meaningful and sustainable, and it's the sorts of ways you feel about your children, or where you do something meaningful for someone that's greatly appreciated, and it's internally connected. And karma yoga. This is, there's different kinds of yoga. Many people here practice yoga, and there's the asana version, the physical forms of yoga, but yoga means union, and it's much more than the physical forms. And there's 4 paths in Hinduism. There's jnana yoga, which is the knowledge, the teachings. There's Raja Yoga, which is meditation. There's Bhakti Yoga, which is devotion. There's Karma Yoga, which is the path of action, so suiting your different personality types. And this is the one that appealed to me, and in its best form, it's about taking action to serve others. In its best form, it's unconditional, and this really spoke to me. Tibet, I'm going to go through a little photo travelogue here as well with you quickly. Tibet's in western China. I think there's probably a little bigger than that originally, but it's a narrower geographic region, prescribed region now. The map on the right is the blow-up of Tibet, and you can see Lhasa there in the middle bottom. You can see Kathmandu, and up in the upper northeast corner is, right-hand corner is where we were visiting in Yushu and Zadu. And this was in October, and you're at 13,500 feet, but you've got to go through some passes, and some of these passes are 17,000 or 18,000 feet. So it's beautiful, and it's challenging at the same time, and these are prayer flags, which you see everywhere in Tibet. This is the hospital we were involved in constructing. It's an 80-bed hospital, conventional hospital on the right. The one in the back is a traditional Tibetan healing center. This is the orphanage. You can see the mountains behind it. We're just off the Mekong River. The headwaters of the Mekong River are in the Himalayan plateau here in Tibet. There's 200 children there. There's some pictures of them. They're beautiful children, but they live under very harsh conditions. A young girl, a young boy. That's me on the right. It was great connecting with them there. This is a monastery. We're involved in a project with one of the monasteries and stupas, and as you know, there's issues with the Chinese and Tibet, but what was interesting here is you can see there's some young boys, and they were welcoming me with these white silk prayer scarves. And what was wonderful was the young boys there, because there's so much attrition in the monasteries. They're not shutting them all down, but they're not letting new monks join, whereas they were here. And here's a picture. Unfortunately, there's a light pole or something in front of the picture of the monastery there, and that's inside the monastery with Karma Jume, Rinpoche Karma Jume. And so in Tibet, what did I learn? And again, this is just, there's so much to share, but I'm just trying to stay on the highlights here. Om Mani Padme Hum is a Tibetan Buddhist mantra. And as I'm told, there's 85,000 texts in Tibetan Buddhism. This is the summary of all 85,000 texts, this mantra, and it's the union of compassion and wisdom. The Medicine Buddha, our interaction, our experience there was with this great Dzogchen tantric master named Rinpoche Karma Jume. And it was a wonderful experience being with him. He's a famous healer. Thousands of people from Tibet and China come to visit with him to experience his unique kind of healing abilities. When he travels occasionally to the West, thousands of people come from all over the world to visit with him. I'm just going to mention here that this was about 8 years later that I was in Tibet, and how was it? I told you about India, but I didn't tell you about how I connected here, and it was, I'll go back to when I first started meditating, and I met with this Taoist Qigong master who was teaching me this practice, and he said to me, you know, you're going to meet many masters in this life. And I said, well, I wasn't planning, I wasn't thinking about meeting many masters, and he just laughed and he said, it doesn't work that way. The world works a little differently than that way. And my meeting with the Rinpoche was like that. It was years later. He was coming to Calgary. I was living there at the time. And about 4 or 5 friends synchronistically had said, you've got to meet him, and because he provides these healings. And I was still on my journey for healing. And I went, and we met, and he invited me to come by the next day. And he said, I've been looking for you, which was wonderful to hear. And I'm not sharing that story to think, you know, aren't I great because he was looking for me. It was more just an insight into, I think, how things work behind the scenes, in a sense. And that was very powerful. And my friends kid me about, how do you have all these connections in India and Tibet? And I say, well, I'm pretty high maintenance. I think some of us need more help than others, and I'm in that category. But as they've shared with me, it's not about me, it's about what I can do for others. The other thing that's extraordinary, and we heard a lot about this earlier, the Tibetan Buddhist definition of mind. You know, the Eskimos have 14 or 16 words for snow, different kinds of snow. The Tibetan Buddhists have many different words, terms for states of mind. But mind is defined as both the head and the heart. And I think the world needs more of that kind of consciousness. And I think individually and organizations and corporately, we would do well to keep that perspective in mind. And I've tried to honor those teachings and insights. So how to integrate all of this? And I'm doing this very quickly here. It was a long process and so on, but I had extraordinary experiences for many years in the East, in India and Tibet. And there was a couple of catalytic type questions. Enough, the question of enough. When is enough enough? And for me, in many ways, arguably, I had way more than enough. I mean, enough in terms of enough for myself and my family. And this was a question that I needed to address, that I learned, and I got the insight that I had enough already. And it was no longer about what I needed. what I was an entrepreneur, and I continue to be an entrepreneur, continue to be successful with it. But it was getting, the excitement was coming off it a little bit because we had more than we needed. But I made the commitment to say that we had enough for the family and give all the growth, any success that I had, to philanthropic efforts and to help others, which really helped accelerate some of the things we were doing over there. And it was really that term karma yoga. I mean, it was a form of karma yoga in a sense. It was service through entrepreneurship. That was my unique ability that I could share with others. And not just in terms of the funding, but in terms of some of the expertise that you gain when you become an entrepreneur. And I met, at the time, Phil Harkins. There's a book there on the right, In Search of Leadership, that I was invited to write with Phil Harkins, who is the co-chairman of the Global Institute of Leadership Development, with Warren Bennis, who's considered the guru of leadership. He was the chairman of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and he's passed away recently. But I met them, and I was sharing some of this experience, the longer version of this, with them, and they said, this is intriguing. I think really there's insights here that would be helpful for leaders all over the world to hear about. And so we explored this whole idea. We called it unconditional leadership, about getting outside of yourself and using your leadership to serve others. And through Phil Harkins, who had incredible contacts, he said, let's explore this with great leaders around the world. So we were able to spend time with Benazir Bhutto before she passed away, Mikhail Gorbachev, Aaron Gruel of Freedom Writers' Diaries, Henry Landworth, who started Give Kids the World, among others. And really it proved out that whole concept that when you get outside yourself's quite finite, whereas the world is infinite. And if you step into the infinite, you're going to be so much more powerful yourself and so much more effective, and it's going to be so much more meaningful. I'll talk about the Souder Center in terms of some of the things I'm doing locally. It's the Souder Center for Social Innovation and Impact Investing here that I was one of the founders of. So to get onto the projects more locally here, integrative medicine, as you can see on this personal journey, I came by it honestly, that I had these extraordinary experiences, and I had my own experience with conventional and various alternative initiatives in alternative medicine. And I think all the traditions are valuable. I've benefited from allopathic therapies, conventional therapies, and I've benefited enormously from some of these other traditions. And so I think it's integrative versus alternative. And I can say, just to let you know, how did I make out in the last 25 years since I got this? I was up, this is a great story to tell here in Whistler. I did 5 days of heli skiing earlier this year in the winter, successfully, and kept up. And that's not anything I could have done years ago. So it's I think it's integrative versus alternative. There was great examples given about how we need to connect different parts of ourselves. The World Health Organization, is part of their strategy, integrating traditional healing strategies and their vision for healthcare internationally. Perhaps the tree analogy is an interesting one. You can cut off a dead branch or the fruit, but it's the whole tree. It's the soil, it's the nutrients, it's the water, and so on that are important to the health of the tree. And again, I think it's the integrative approach. I know the Western philosophical approaches aren't all like this, and it was very interesting to hear the panel discussion about using technology to give us new insights and help in medicine. But there is a tendency in the reductionist, mechanistic, materialistic approach in the West to understand something, to break it into smaller and smaller pieces. And sometimes I feel like, we have our nose on the pixel, see the pixels, we've got to step back to see the whole. And I think it's about the whole that is important in healing and wellness. So there's an opportunity we wanted to pursue in this realm, and it's which I'll describe in a moment. And it's I think the integrative preventative model is a huge opportunity for impact in our healthcare system, which is in crisis in terms of costs. And it's a paradigm that integrates things that many people were talking about earlier today. And as my friend Dr. Guarneri, who's the president of the U.S. Academy of Integrative Medicine, says, healthcare can be an economic strategy. So a little background on S3I. We're pursuing this initiative in integrative medicine. We're focused on diabetes. It's at S3I. It's the Souder Center for Social Innovation and Impact Investing. I was a founder there. It was intrigued when I heard about what Jeff Skoll had done at Oxford for the Center for Social Enterprise. And it turned one of the professors, I was on the advisory board, one of the professors at the business school had worked at Oxford at that center, and it intrigued me, the whole idea of impact investing, investing with purpose, given my background in entrepreneurship, in philanthropy, and in investing. And so I was involved in starting that center. It used to be called ISIS initially, after the Egyptian goddess of innovation and what could possibly go wrong. And we renamed it the very melodic S3I here. So we've been active over the last 10 years. We've been active in areas of low carbon economy and social finance, and the new initiative, and we're just staffing people now, is in integrative medicine. And the focus is diabetes. We're thinking, it took a year or two to really understand what area we should focus on, because it's so big and it's so infinite, and where can we intervene, where can we engage? And diabetes seemed to be the one where this preventative, integrative approach could be very effective, and where we could get early results, demonstrable results. And our vision, and we don't have time to take you through all the analysis, but our aspirational goal, we think there is the evidence that we could potentially reduce the burden of diabetes in Canada by 50%. So diabetes is a crisis in the world. There's 415 million people worldwide that suffer from it. Obesity is an epidemic in modern economies. 2.5 million adults in Canada have diabetes, 200,000 new cases per year. The prevalence is about 10%, and in the age group over 65, it's about 65%. And as someone pointed out, when you add in the pre-diabetics, it's a much larger group. And it's a crisis in the healthcare system. One of the people we talked to is the dean of the medical school at UBC, who's chairing a panel on obesity and diabetes, the #1 healthcare issue in British Columbia. There's rich literature and information on this disease. And what's intriguing, and it ties in very closely with what was being talked about in the last few presenters here, that lifestyle interventions can be highly effective. Things like diet, exercise, lifestyle coaching. Some of the tech is important in terms of monitoring. But with those kinds of interventions, there's so much evidence about the results that you can get in this, much more effective than an allopathic approach, and very quickly and demonstrably. And we're collaborating with groups internationally to discover what we want to, rather than reinvent the wheel, we want to reach out, see what's being done all over the world to see how we can collaborate with them. One of the more interesting areas is in Israel, and what they're doing with health impact bonds. They've developed a project targeting pre-diabetics and against a control group. And with the protocol they're using along those lifestyle interventions, they are significantly reducing the incidence of the group that's on the protocol in getting diabetes. And what they structured, they had activist or catalytic philanthropists put up the money to support the program, but they negotiated with the government that there's huge savings to the government if they're successful with this, and that if they are successful, the government will pay, through the savings, will pay back the bond, and then the return on the bond will depend on how successful the program is. So we're spending time studying that with them and seeing if we can't create a pilot project here, and then if we're successful, to scale it. And public or private, when I mention this sort of thing, and we've had lots of interest, people say, you realize this is going to be really incredibly difficult working with the public system, the public healthcare system. And it kind of feels like Ocean's 11 or something, where everybody says, we're going to do that? That looks impossible. Who's in? And everybody puts their hand up. So we're going to see what we can do here. It may be a private initiative. We've got some great advisors, Dr. Guarneri, who I mentioned, a good friend, president of the U.S. Academy of Integrative Medicine, author of The Heart Speaks and The Secret Language of Healing, who's very interested in this, and another friend, Dr. Kulreet Chowdhury, who's a neurologist and an Ayurvedic physician. She's written a book, The Prime. She's just finishing a book. I wanted to chat to her this week, and she said, I don't have time. I'm writing a book on mantras in the brain, and that's going to come out shortly. But she's a neurologist. She's actually going to run the Ayurvedic Center in India that we're building. And there's others that have expressed interest. So now, Michelle, how much time do I have here? Am I used up my time?
Yeah, but we really like hearing you talk.
Can I get another 2 or 3 minutes?
Yeah, it's just breaking into lunch. You're more important than lunch.
Oh, okay. I'm between you and lunch, but this is a hard place to be. So, entrepreneurial lessons. I wanted to share some thoughts here, and And please feel free, I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs and people involved in startups, and I was a securities analyst. I've analyzed thousands of companies. We've got a private equity business with billions of capital. We're always spending time looking at entrepreneurs and looking at investments. And so if you want to come up and chat afterwards, I'm happy to chat with you. I want to start with the challenge of capital. I mean, entrepreneurs are thinking the challenge is we need more capital to pursue our vision. I want to flip it around a little bit. What's the challenge of capital? The challenge of capital is they've got lots of capital. What they don't have is great teams with great strategies. Be that great team with that great strategy. Commitment. One of my favorite quotes is by Goethe on this. I'm not going to have time to read it, but it's about being all in. And when you're all in, he quotes, providence moves too. All sorts of extraordinary things happen to you and for you in ways you couldn't have imagined when you're committed in that way. And if you're not committed in that way, what are you doing? Or as someone said flippantly, life is what happens when you're making other plans. So I think you all know that if you've been focused on how challenging that is. The challenge, adversity, perseverance, existential threat. The first two are personal. The last one's corporate. Creating a business is a very difficult process, and there's a lot of challenges and difficulties, and you need to overcome them and bring your A game every day, as many of you would know. An existential threat, that's the corporate version of it. And as Bill Gates said, every company's 2 years from going out of business. And that's when you're in business. But if you're trying to get into business, you're not even in business yet. So that's going to be challenging. And people think maybe mistakenly that these successful companies were great people with a great idea and it just went straight up. And it's never like that. It's never like that. But it's very satisfying when you do achieve it. Team, the team is critical. The track record, if you have one, is ideal. That's so much easier for investors to support. If you don't, it's the potential. Unfortunately, that usually leads to friends and family. Kind of funny to get the track record that you can go and get more sophisticated capital. You may know about that, many about that. Risk. Many people think it's about risk-taking, but some of the most successful entrepreneurs I've seen, it's about risk management more than risk-taking. The next one's it's Jim Collins' quote, "The alchemy of discipline and entrepreneurship," is another one. It's maybe a little paradoxical because you think entrepreneurship and intuition and creating new visions and new ideas. How do you tie that in with discipline? But there's incredible, on the team, if you can develop the rigorous processes to stress test the ideas before you run with them, can be very valuable. Final 5, relationship and business development. This is critical, not the relationship in the sense I remember your kids' birthdays, but the relationship where you're really adding value and you're building strategic relationships. And you're adding value in those relationships. That will play back in a very positive way for you in building your company. Unique ability. I think this is the best things that will happen are when you're leveraging your strengths, and you need to there's a process to discover what your strengths are, and then you need to fill out whatever the rest of the skills are. You need to make sure that they're on the team as well. Adaptive strategy. Very few companies kind of hit the nail on the head out of the chute in terms of a strategy that's enduring forever. Often you have to adapt. The world's very dynamic, and you need to adapt as the world changes. That's tended to be most successful. Integrity. This is an obvious one. It's 0-1, and you say yeah, but it's really profound. It builds trust. You know, when you have the inevitable ups and downs, more the downs than the ups, when you want trust from support from your investors, this is critical. And in extremely difficult situations, the difference between life and death, as I've seen it with companies. And finally, Unconditional Leadership, the book that we wrote, that I think if you can pursue your vision beyond your own agenda for something bigger than yourself, I think that will set you up, that will increase the probability of success in your venture and magnify your potential. So in conclusion, to answer the question that I posed at the beginning, the day you discover why you were born is the second most important day. I don't know any of you. Well, I do know a couple of you, but I know this about every one of you. But I think the only ones of you that are going to find true meaning and joy in the journey are going to be those of you who discover what your unique ability is, and then find some way to align it with a greater purpose and to serve others. Thank you.